Have you ever wondered, why do some people remain calm even when the world around them is collapsing? When everyone is raging, panicking, or trying to control every detail, they just stay silent, watching everything pass by with eyes as still as water. While most of us live like exposed nerves, just a slightly off-key word, a cold glance, a small failure is enough to awaken the storm. Those people stand at a deeper level of consciousness, where emotions no longer dominate, but are merely streams of energy observed, not swept away. Jung believed that we do not react to events, but to the meaning we assign to them. A word only hurts us when it touches an unhealed wound inside. Every reaction is a signal that there is something within us that has not yet been seen, not yet accepted. Calmness, therefore, is not a cold mask, but the result of a profound process, stopping the blame on external circumstances, turning back to dialogue with one's own shadow. When we see the shadow instead of running away, reactions dissolve, and in that silence, consciousness begins to reclaim control. But how do we stop the onrushing reaction? How, in the moment of being touched, can we choose presence instead of being swept away? In today's video, we will delve into the mechanism of the human psyche, where reaction is no longer destiny, but a mirror leading us back to ourselves. 1. Diagnosis. I am not living. I am only reacting. Have you ever felt like you are living in a state of perpetual reflex, where every word, every glance, every small deviation of life makes you waver? Someone doesn't text back right away, and you grow restless. A small comment, and you overthink all night. A silence, and you feel rejected. And so, instead of living, you react. Not to reality, but to the fear of abandonment, judgment, or not being good enough. Jung called this state living unconsciously. When consciousness is no longer the subject, but merely a puppet of unhealed wounds. Most of us think we are living mindfully, but for the most part, we are merely responding to the world like a mirror, reflecting every stimulus. We smile when praised, shrink when criticized, grow angry when misunderstood, and panic when ignored. Every emotion becomes a product of the external, as if we no longer have our own soul, just conditioned reflexes. The more sensitive we are to the world, the more profound we think we are. But in truth, sometimes that is only a sign of an unstable inner world, where every external stimulus easily touches unhealed regions. Much of our actions, words, and decisions are guided by the collective unconscious and rejected personal experiences. When someone hurts us, we do not ache only because of them. We ache because a chain of memories is activated. The cold father, the critical mother, the betraying friend, the times we were overlooked. All that past crystallizes in the present moment, and we react as if it is a matter of survival. In psychology, this phenomenon has a name: automatic emotional response. It is when the nervous system, specifically the amygdala, activates before reason can intervene. A contrary word, and the body immediately reacts as if facing danger. Heart rate spikes, muscles tense, the mind whirls in search of defense. In that moment, we are no longer ourselves. We become the panicked child, trying to protect the fragments of self-esteem. A small example. You send a message to someone you care about, but they don't reply. The mind begins weaving a series of stories. They're avoiding me. What did I do wrong? They probably don't love me anymore. Those assumptions do not come from reality, but from old wounds of abandonment. Unconsciously, that memory is awakened, and you react to the shadow of the past, not the person in the present. That is the paradox of reaction. It makes us live in a time that is not now, but that day. When reaction becomes habit, the mind falls into an addiction cycle of emotions. Just as the body grows accustomed to caffeine, the soul grows accustomed to tension, judgment, indignation, and anxiety. Each time we are stimulated, we feel alive. But that is not living. It is the depletion of the soul's energy. The more we react, the more we lose our center, and the more we lose our center, the more we need stimulation to feel we still exist. This is one of the most subtle tragedies of modern humanity, equating reaction with the essence of living. Jung once likened unconscious living to standing before a mirror without realizing the person in it is oneself. We think the world is constantly attacking us, but in truth, we are seeing our fragmented inner world reflected outward. A cold person hurts us, not because they are bad, but because they touch the part of us that once craved warmth. A judgment makes us angry, not because it is wrong, but because it strikes the part of ourselves we have not yet accepted. But we do not know how to read those signs. Instead, we hurl them back at the world. We argue. We walk away. We build barriers. We retreat into silence. Every external reaction is merely an effort to avoid looking inward, and so we repeat the old script without realizing it. The problem was never out there. Jung called this projection. When we do not understand ourselves, we see the world through the fog of wounds. Then imagine it is the one causing our pain. Number 2, the mechanism of projection. Projection, according to Carl Jung, is an ancient psychological law that almost everyone falls into unconsciously. Projection means we cast outward the parts of ourselves we do not want to see. Like projecting a film onto a screen, those images are not truly out there. They originate from the projector inside you. When someone makes you uncomfortable, angry, hurt, fearful, it often says little about them and much about your inner map, the unaccepted dark regions, the undigested memories. Someone who disrespects you may make you angry, but that anger is not aimed only at them. It touches the part of you that once felt overlooked in the past. Someone more successful than you may evoke envy, but in truth, they only activate the unrealized potential within you, and the one who judges you most harshly is often the judging ego within you, which you have long tried to deny. Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." The frightening thing about projection is how subtle it is. You never see yourself doing it. You believe that person is toxic. Life is unfair. Everyone disappoints me. But in the very moment you say those things, you are revealing your own unconscious map. The outside world is neither bad nor good. It is neutral, but your mind colors it with fear, desire, expectation, and unidentified wounds. Jung called this the fog of perception, where we do not see the world, but only the reflection of our inner self. Think of a mirror in a room. If the mirror is dusty, the reflection will be blurred, distorted, and ugly. But instead of cleaning the mirror, we try to fix the world in it. We rage at the other person, resent the circumstances, disdain what does not suit us. We do not realize we are only fighting our own reflection. That is why Jung called projection the soul's trap. It keeps humanity running in circles, trying to change the outside to evade the inside. A modern psychological perspective shows projection is not just an abstract concept. It is the ego's defense mechanism. When an emotion is too uncomfortable, or an aspect of the self is deemed unacceptable, for example, selfishness, weakness, jealousy, desire. The mind casts it outward to avoid confrontation, but what is cast out does not vanish. It returns in the form of others. And so we encounter people who are selfish, weak, fake, cruel, when in truth they are merely carrying the parts we have disowned. For example, someone who always sees themselves as kind will easily be hurt by others' indifference because their own suppressed indifference has been bottled up too long. Someone living to prove they are confident will feel rage toward arrogance because they are facing their own repressed insecurity. In both cases, the world is merely a stage for our unconscious to perform, and the tragedy is, we believe we are reacting to others, when in truth, we are dialoguing with the parts of ourselves we have not yet accepted. And perhaps in the very moment you realize this, that everything that irritates you is pointing back to yourself, that is when the deepest conversation begins. If something in you has just been touched, leave a thought, a moment of realization, or even just a small exclamation. Who knows, your shared stream might become the mirror that helps someone else see their unseen part. Projection is the mechanism that blinds us to ourselves. We see our flaws in others, our pettiness in that one, our fear in the world, and we fight only to avoid the mirror. But Jung believed it is also the only door to consciousness. We do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. When we realize that everything outside is merely a mirror, we begin to live differently. Fewer reactions, more observation. And when we understand that, compassion arises. We rush less to condemn others, because we know everyone is struggling with their own shadow parts. The angry one is fighting fear. The manipulative one is hiding a weakness. The cold one is trying not to be hurt. The world ceases to be a battlefield and becomes a classroom of consciousness. Thus, what needs to be learned is not avoiding stimulation, but seeing through it. Each time someone makes you waver, pause and ask, why does this touch me this way? That question is the boundary between the reactor and the awakened one. The more one dares to illuminate oneself, the more transparent their world becomes. And in that transparency, calmness begins to be born, not because the world is less harsh, but because we have stopped projecting our shadows onto it. Number 3. Meeting the shadow. And as the mirror of projection fades, when we are brave enough to see the world no longer through the lens of fear or judgment, a deeper phase begins. The phase that Carl Jung called confronting the shadow. This is one of the hardest steps in the journey of awakening, because it forces us to look directly at the very parts of ourselves we have spent a lifetime avoiding. The shadow is not an enemy. It is the forgotten part of the soul, imprisoned in the depths of the unconscious from the early years, where we learn to be good, be loved, be accepted. Each time we were called selfish, we hid our needs. Each time we were scolded for weakness, we buried our true feelings. Each time we were hurt for being inadequate, we built a shell of strength. And so piece by piece, the self was severed, pushed into the darkness, leaving a social self that is perfect, but rootless. An easy example. Some people always try to prove they are strong, not weak, not needing anyone. But deep down, inside them, is a child who was never hugged. When life inadvertently touches that wound with indifference, rejection, or silence, they react fiercely, not because the present is too painful, but because the old pain was never healed. The shadow always demands to be seen in that way. It sends messages through emotional storms, hoping to be heard. From a psychological perspective, the shadow is the compressed data repository of the mind. Like a hidden operating system running behind every action, It controls habits, choices, and even the relationships you attract. Each time we react, rage or fear, it is a program in the shadow being activated. We think we are choosing, but in truth, we are only running old code. And only when we dare to step into that depth, observe each line of code, can we rewrite our lives. In essence, the shadow is the wild part within us, containing both power and wound. It is the primal energy, unshaped by morality, culture, or social norms. If the unconscious is the ocean, the shadow is the ocean's deepest trench, dark, cold, terrifying, but also where treasures lie hidden. Jung called it the raw material of the soul. If you dare to touch it, you may find your primordial and powerful self. Confronting the shadow is not drowning in guilt, but learning to look straight at what is most uncomfortable while still holding kindness toward oneself. When we dare to say, yes, there is a selfish part in me, a weak part, a fearful part that wants recognition, we have opened the first door to wholeness. For acceptance is the antidote to the unconscious. Everything seen begins to melt. One of the first signs of meeting the shadow is resistance. The mind will try to justify, deny, and deflect. It will say, I'm not like that. It's their fault. But when you learn to pause and ask, which part of me is speaking, you begin shifting from reaction to observation. At that point, the shadow is no longer an enemy, but a teacher. Each time an emotion rises, instead of suppressing it, you listen. What do you want to tell me? And often the answer is, I just want to be acknowledged. There is a truth Jung always emphasized. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Enlightenment does not come from seeking light, but from looking straight into the inner darkness. The shadow does not want to destroy you. It wants to be embraced. It wants you to be mature enough to say, I am not perfect, and that does not make me less valuable. When you do that, the shadow dissolves, and the energy once buried, creativity, intuition, and inner strength, begins to revive. When you begin to understand the shadow, you also begin to understand others, because you realize everyone has similar dark parts. They just are not ready to face them. And so, instead of judging, you empathize. Instead of reacting, you observe. Instead of resisting, you learn. You become still, not because you lose emotions, but because you have seen through their roots. 4. From control to letting go. This is the stage where the soul learns its greatest lesson. From control to letting go. Carl Jung once said, what you resist persists, and indeed, modern humanity lives in a state of constant resistance. We try to control outcomes, emotions, how others think of us, and even things beyond our reach. But that very control is the cause of our loss of freedom. The tighter we grip, the more we lose the natural rhythm of life. Like holding sand in the palm of your hand, the harder you squeeze, the more it slips away. Look at the relationships around you. In love, we want the other to stay, to understand, not to change. But the more we try to hold on, the more love becomes tense, suffocating, and ultimately dissolves. At work, we fear failure, losing our position, and no longer being recognized. We plan, back up, predict every scenario, but one small twist, and the entire balance collapses. We think control is safety, but in truth, it is fear disguised as rationality. Jung believed that the need for control stems from the ego's survival instinct, the part of us that always fears losing status, image, or certainty. The ego cannot tolerate uncertainty because uncertainty recalls the helplessness of childhood, when we were small, dependent, and vulnerable. So as we grow, we build an illusion that if we try hard enough, calculate enough, are strong enough, we will be safe. But life has its own laws. It always overflows the frames we draw, and each time reality shatters the plan, we hurt not because we lose control, but because the illusion of control crumbles. The outer world, according to Jung, cannot be controlled. It can only be understood. Everything that happens reflects something within us, and our task is not to resist, but to learn to see the meaning in that flow. Letting go, in Jungian philosophy, is not abandonment, but the highest form of conscious maturity. When we stop playing the role of the boat's captain and become the one who understands the wind's direction. If you can, pause here for a moment, close your eyes, and try to feel your breath. What are you gripping so tightly that your body tenses with it? That breath is the answer. Harvard research shows that when people learn to accept rather than force, the brain region associated with stress diminishes sharply, while the areas linked to cognition and clarity become more active. Letting go does not make us weaker. It makes us more flexible, wiser, and closer to the truth. Perhaps you have experienced this. After months of struggling for solutions, fighting, tormenting yourself, one day you grow weary and let out a long sigh. Fine, let things be as they are. And strangely, right after that, everything begins to arrange itself. People call it fate, luck, but Jung called it a meaningful coincidence when inner and outer energies align in the same frequency. When you stop trying to control, life begins to flow in your rhythm because you have ceased disrupting the natural flow. But letting go does not mean helplessness or resignation. It is a conscious act. The act of one who understands that the best energy does not come from straining, but from full presence in each moment. You still act, still strive, but no longer from fear, but from clarity, no longer fighting to prove, but to express yourself. And then, outcomes no longer define your worth. They are merely reflections of your inner state. Jung likened this process to the art of the spiritual mountaineer. The higher you climb, the more you must shed your baggage. What you think is strength, willpower, control, and expectations is what weighs you down. Only in letting go do you light enough to continue the journey. And the paradox lies here. The more you let go, the stronger you become. For true strength does not lie in the ability to dominate, but in abiding amid impermanence. Letting go is trusting that life has its own intelligence. It is the state Jung called consciousness, merging with the flow of the unconscious, when we no longer separate ourselves from life, but become part of it. At that point, fear vanishes because there is nothing left to lose. Everything is merely experience, no longer a threat. And when you let go, the world changes how it treats you. Things that once made you panic now are just ripples. People who once hurt you are now characters in your learning journey. Plans that once obsessed you become a game. You realize life never needed to be controlled. It only needed to be trusted. Number 5. Activating the observing ego. If before you were the wave, raging, fearing, worrying, loving, hating, now you begin to see that there is a part within you not swept away by that wave. That part is silent, unmoving, like the deep sea beneath the waves. It is the observing ego, the conscious part, capable of witnessing without identification. It does not judge, does not intervene, does not try to fix. It only looks, and in that gaze, all chaos begins to rearrange itself. Jung called it the birth of consciousness through the capacity for reflection. You can feel this in the smallest moments of daily life. When someone says something that irritates you, you feel the heat rise in, but instead of reacting, you silently observe. Ah, this is anger, that's all. No need to resist, no need to justify. And the strange thing happens. Anger is no longer you. It becomes a phenomenon within you, like a cloud passing through the sky. Before, you were the cloud. Now, you are the sky. Jung once wrote that one cannot heal if one remains identified with one's wound. Only when we can look at it from the outside does it lose its control. The observing ego is that sacred distance, the space between I am hurting and I am noticing that I am hurting. This space is fragile, but once opened, it becomes true inner freedom. No one can touch it, no words can wound it, because it is the part that does not react, only knows. In practice, this does not come from forced effort, but from the practice of mindfulness. When you sit in a cafe and see your mind start racing, why haven't they replied? Did I do something wrong? Instead of stopping those thoughts, you just watch them like a movie viewer. You smile and whisper, "Interesting. My mind is worrying." That smile is the starting point of freedom, because the moment you can notice you are thinking, you are no longer ruled by thought. Another example, you are in an argument, the other is harsh, and you feel your heart pounding, breath quickening. If in that moment you can recognize, my body is reacting, my heart is contracting, I am being triggered, you have separated yourself from the reaction, and when you are in the observer's position, you will no longer say words you regret later. You no longer need to win, because you are no longer caught in the game. You see through the emotional script and choose to respond from clarity. Jung viewed the observing ego as the intermediate step between the ego and the self, the deepest self. When the observing part is nurtured, we gradually realize that the ego is not the center of the universe, but merely a character in the greater play of consciousness. And when we stop playing the role, we truly see the script, seeing the habits, reflexes, wounds, and fears that once controlled us. Jung called it the process of disidentifying from the false identification. The fascinating thing is, when the observing ego operates, you do not become cold or indifferent as many think. On the contrary, you become deeper and more compassionate, because you begin to see that everyone around you is also driven by the same emotional waves you once experienced. Instead of anger, you empathize. Instead of defending, you listen. Instead of trying to win, you choose to understand. And that presence alone changes the entire energy of the interaction. People sense the peace in you, and they too begin to soften. One could say, the observing ego is the guardian of the door to consciousness. It does not fight the darkness, does not try to erase emotions. It only lights the lamp in the room, and when light is present, darkness dissolves on its own. In Jungian practice, this is seen as a form of active but non-interfering observation, like how an alchemist quietly watches metal transform in the furnace. The alchemist does not prolong or burn the process. He only keeps the fire steady. Consciousness is the same. Just be present, and it heals itself. Awakening the observing ego is the shift from instinct to consciousness, from reaction to choice, from unconscious to freedom. When this part grows strong, you realize you no longer need to control emotions as before, because you have stepped beyond the control system. Emotions come and go, like guests. You only open the door, invite them in, then see them out. You are no longer defined by them. And that is true calmness, not the absence of emotion, but presence in every emotion, without dissolving into it. Restructuring the ego. When the observing ego is awakened, you begin to see clearly the masks you once thought were yourself. Each time you look back, you realize that much of our life is not built on truth, but on a makeshift structure of the ego, what Jung called the persona or social mask. And it is precisely then that the journey of restructuring the ego begins, not to become someone else, but to return to your own center. You can feel this most clearly when an event occurs. Losing a job, a breakup, being misunderstood, or being judged. When everything collapses, it is not the world against you, but the old structure of I crumbling. Jung once said, "Crisis is the opportunity for the soul to be reborn, because only when the false ego melts away does the true I, the self, have space to emerge." This restructuring does not come from effort, but from absolute honesty with oneself. Who am I when there is nothing left to prove? According to Jung, the process of restructuring the ego is not about completely dismantling the ego, but redefining the relationship between the ego and the soul. The ego is necessary for orientation, but it must not usurp the throne. Jung likened this to a solar system. The ego is just a planet orbiting the central self, but we live as if the ego is the sun. When we recognize that misalignment, we begin returning to the natural orbit, and that is the soul's humility, knowing one is not the center of the universe, but still has a role in its operation. In psychology, this stage is viewed as identity restructuring. When people go through crisis, loss, or upheaval, the old ego structure no longer fits the new experiences. The belief system collapses, forcing them to rebuild their self-perception. But this is not a tragedy. It is natural spiritual evolution, like a snake that must shed its skin, or it cannot grow further. The old ego is made from what others say about us, but the new ego, the true ego, is born from silence, when we stop listening to the external noise. Jung believed the self does not need to be built, it only needs the overlays removed. When we stop identifying with titles, roles, or the past, we begin to see within us a witness, not the parent, not the wounded child, not the victim or hero, but the pure being watching both roles with compassion. An easy image is the ancient tree. Through the storm season, it may lose branches, shed all leaves, but the trunk still stands. The trunk is the self, the enduring center. The branches and leaves are the persona, the roles, the parts that change with the seasons. The mature person is not one who does not lose leaves, but one who knows leaves are only part of the life cycle, not the whole being. Restructuring the ego is also the journey of re-examining the relationship between self and world. When still at the ego level, we always seek feedback to affirm worth. Someone praises, we feel valuable. Someone criticizes, we collapse. But when the ego is repositioned, we no longer live by reflection, but by our own light, no longer needing others to confirm I am good, I am worthy, I am right. We know it, and that knowing is silent, but solid as rock. It is also when you understand the paradox of maturity. You do not need to destroy the ego as many philosophies advise. You only need to soothe it. The ego is not bad. It is just panicked when thrust into the center. When you let it rest, when the observing ego holds the wheel, the ego becomes a tool rather than a king. It begins to serve the soul instead of ruling it, and from there, you live more freely, not because you lack an ego, but because the ego is no longer a chain. At this level, calmness is no longer a goal, but a consequence of inner unity. You are no longer torn between the person I want to become and the person I am. No need to choose between reason and emotion, strength and fragility, because you have seen all are one. Restructuring the ego does not turn you into someone else. It brings you back to the person you already were, before fear, expectations, and pretense covered it over. 7. Core practices. Before stepping into the final part of this journey, I want to pause for a moment to thank you. Thank you for coming this far, through each deep layer of the psyche, through those dark regions that not everyone has the courage to look into. If you have read too far, it means there is a movement within you, a very small but real call from the depths of the soul. I want to understand myself and stay a little longer, because the next part is not just knowledge, but the path for you to experience transformation yourself, where everything Jung ever said is no longer theory, but a living breath every day. This is the part that can change the way you feel about life forever. If what you have read touches some corner within you, leave a small sign, a like, a subscribe, or simply continuing here with me, not for the numbers, but because this journey is still unfolding, and I believe that each time you return, you will find another piece of yourself. Now, let's begin together. The first practice is not in technique, but in the attitude of living. It is pausing, taking a deep breath, and asking, right now, what is really happening within me? That is not a question to find an answer to, but a way to bring consciousness back to the present, because the unconscious can only dominate us when we are absent. Once you are fully present in this moment, you have escaped the power of automatic reactions. This practice can start from very small things. When you drink water, when arguing, or when anxious. Pause for half a second. Observe the flow happening within you, without judgment, without fixing. Just look. That very moment is Jungian meditation, the meditation of living awareness. From there, we learn the second practice, dialogue with the unconscious. Jung called this active imagination, where we converse with the images, emotions, or memories that arise instead of avoiding them. When a strong emotion appears, like fear, jealousy, or deep sorrow, instead of suppressing it, ask it, "What have you come to tell me?" Write down that dialogue, draw it, or simply listen in stillness. Many think this is mere fantasy, but for Jung, it is the language of the soul. The unconscious does not speak in words, but in symbols, images, and emotions. When we dare to listen, the forgotten parts within us begin to tell their stories, and in each story lies a piece of healing. Next, we practice accepting emotions as a sacred part of the spiritual process. Society teaches us to evade fear, hide anger, and suppress tears. But Jung saw emotions as doors leading into the soul. Each emotion is living energy, not yet understood, a message from the depths. When we allow ourselves to grieve without judgment, to be angry without attacking, we are making that energy conscious. Only when emotions are fully felt do they transform into insight. Anger faced directly can become self-respect. A sorrow embraced can turn into compassion. That is resolution by the light of consciousness, not by the discipline of reason. The next practice comes from a simple but profoundly powerful action: writing. Writing not to vent, but to illuminate. Jung once asked his patients to record dreams, emotions, and inner dialogues in a journal as a way of dialoguing with the unconscious on paper. Writing allows you to see your own psychological flow, the repetitions, the repressions, the symbolic images. When writing, do not try to rationalize. Let the hand go before the head. Write as if listening to a gentle voice from within, and through each line, you will see yourself gradually unraveling the invisible threads connecting the present and the unconscious. Another practice, subtle but no less important, is the art of contemplation in silence. Not the silence of avoidance, but the silence that knows how to listen. Each day, just 10 minutes of sitting still. No phone, no goals, no techniques. Just sit and feel life flowing through you. Heartbeat, breath, distant and near sounds. This silence is the realm where consciousness and unconscious meet. It is where the ego steps back and the self speaks. When we truly sit still, everything that needs to be understood reveals itself. When these practices become the rhythm of life, you will notice something wondrous. Life itself begins to practice with you. People, situations, challenges, all become living lessons. Each encounter a mirror, each wound a teacher. When you see everything as messages from the unconscious, the world becomes a sacred book that you are reading page by page with awakened eyes. Finally, all these practices converge on one point: absolute honesty with oneself. Not honesty to self-condemn, but to live truly. And each day, this honesty is a practice. When we realize we are wearing a mask, remove it with gentleness, not judgment. When we see ourselves reacting, smile and return to the observer's position. When we see ourselves wanting to control, remember the breath and let go. Gradually, without force, we become calmer, brighter, and more natural, like a stream no longer obstructed by rocks. Jungian practice does not aim to make us better people, but to make us more real. Because when the real person appears, everything else arranges itself. And in living that way, you no longer seek peace. You are that peace, moving through each day of life.